Welcome to Answering the Bell with me, Stephania Bell. This is a new show where I'll be taking a deep dive into the injury/medical world of the NFL. We'll take a closer look at key injuries, explore hot topics around the NFL health and safety world, and examine how technology and innovation are driving changes in sports medicine and, frankly, sports. On today's episode, we're talking about rookie quarterback and fantasy rock star Anthony Richardson of the Indianapolis Colts. Remember, if you like what you see, leave us a comment, like the video, and make sure to subscribe to the NFL on ESPN YouTube channel for more of my content. All right, let's dive in. With just over a month of playing time under his belt, Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson has given the team reason to be excited about their 4th overall pick by showcasing his abilities both through the air and on the ground. But in week 5, Richardson was tackled by Titans linebacker Harold Landry while on the run, and he landed hard on his right shoulder. Clearly in pain on the ground, he was able to ultimately walk off the field accompanied by members of the Colts medical staff with his right arm hanging low by his side. The next day, Colts head coach Shane Steichen confirmed Richardson had suffered an AC sprain, and the Colts subsequently placed him on injured reserve. Over the next week and a half, he consulted with various specialists, ultimately undergoing reconstructive surgery on his right shoulder on Tuesday, October 24th. So what's next? Well, first, let's take a more detailed look at what the injury is. Most ligament injuries are described as grade 1, mild, grade 2, moderate, or grade 3, severe. But in the case of the AC joint, there are actually additional grades of injury describing more complex problems. A grade 4, or sometimes referred to as a type 4 AC injury, involves everything you see in a grade 3, but in addition, the collarbone or clavicle is displaced backwards. It actually can get caught in the trap, the trapezius muscle, and sit posterior to that process of the shoulder blade. In a grade 5, you have significant elevation of the collarbone. It's displaced much more vertically and all the similar structural damage. And in a grade 6, you can actually get a downward displacement of the clavicle. Now, when you get into the more significant and complex injuries of the AC joint, that's when you start talking about surgery. Dr. Neil Elatrash, who performed Richardson's surgery, operates on numerous overhead athletes and throwers in particular. I've attended medical conferences where he has spoken about how he approaches these injuries, and based on his approach, we can infer the severity of Richardson's injury. Dr. Elatrash rarely operates on a grade 3 AC injury unless the athlete is really struggling to regain muscular control. And even then, that determination is usually made after conservative treatment like physical therapy fails. And that usually takes about 6 weeks. The decision to go to surgery quickly suggests that this injury was more complex. And in the case of an overhead athlete, non-operative treatment for a higher grade injury is not likely to be successful. Colts owner Jim Irsay, in his tweet about Richardson's surgery, described it as, quote, a long procedure. This also points to a more complex injury because an isolated AC repair is pretty quick. If, however, the clavicle, collarbone, is displaced significantly either upward or posteriorly, which is the case with a grade 4, then restoring the collarbone to its proper position, regaining anatomical alignment, and reconstructing or repairing all of the ligaments takes significantly longer to do. But why are these injuries, which are actually pretty common in collision sports like football and hockey, so much more impactful when you're a quarterback and the injuries to your throwing arm? Well, who better to answer this question than a quarterback who has direct experience with this injury and surgery? He joins us now to share his story, my good friend and former NFL quarterback, Alex Smith. Okay, I'd like to welcome in Alex Smith, my ESPN colleague and former NFL quarterback. Thanks so much for taking a few minutes to join me today, Alex.
Of course.
Most people are familiar with the injuries you had late in your career. It was pretty well documented, as I recall. But people may not be as familiar with the significant injury you had early in your career. And you had something very similar to Anthony Richardson. Can you describe it?
Yeah, it was a few games into my 3rd season in the NFL, so still pretty young player, and I'll never forget it. I mean, I'd never had an injury to my throwing shoulder, and really hadn't had a major injury to that point. And we kind of had a protection miscue, and kind of the old fashioned part of the line thought they were going left, part of the line thought they were going right. And so we let a D tackle, we were playing the Seattle Seahawks. We let a defensive tackle run through straight away. So one of the biggest guys on the field, and he jumped on me. And, as a QB, immediately you're taught to protect the football. So you immediately go into this kind of tucked position. I had the ball in my right hand and I tucked it, and obviously just kind of absorbing the hit. And I'll never forget going down to the ground on that shoulder as I've tucked the football in my right arm, and all of my weight and all of his weight coming down kind of on that point, and immediately knowing that something was wrong.
What grade of injury was it? Do you recall?
Grade 3. Yeah. So fully separated. And so at the time though, it wasn't very pronounced. Like you couldn't actually even see it. My collarbone still was kind of sitting down.
So the assumption would be you had surgery and everything was fine when you came back the next year, but what actually happened?
Yeah, not so. I'll never forget. Kind of same thing. You have a rest period after surgery when you're in a sling, and then you slowly get to start doing rehab again, and it would be kind of the same types of exercises, pushing against walls and trying to get some strength and range of motion back. And I mean, from day one, never felt great after surgery. And that was also my first time I've ever had surgery. And you always seems like this quick fix, right? Like, oh yeah, they're gonna fix it and make me feel better. And you go to sleep and you wake up and everything will be fine. And I remember kind of thinking that, like, these are world-renowned, doctors. And it's going to be great. And certainly from day one of my rehab, had a lot of pain working through it. And through that entire time was kind of told, hey, you're working through scar tissue. It's just part of the deal and you're totally fine. And as I began throwing, a few months later, kind of into the off season, and started a throwing regimen, and kind of same thing, never felt right, had a lot of pain and discomfort in my shoulder, but trying to work through it. And again, you just kind of continue to compensate and make adjustments.
How do you compensate? I mean, this is, people want to know, like, how do you do that as a
thrower? It's all the force comes from the ground, believe it or not, right? Like the harder you push in the ground, like that's where energy is generated when you're actually throwing, and then it comes up through your legs and hips, and it's all wound tight, right, coming through your core section, and obviously transfers through your shoulder to your arm and out through the ball. Well, you need all those kind of links in the chain to be strong for that energy to transfer all the way through the ball, right? Like, and the best throwers, and we always say it, like, that guy's got a really strong arm. Well, it doesn't actually come from him just having a strong arm. He can produce all the power in through his legs, and it actually gets to the football, right? There's not a lot of leakage. Like the energy is not leaking out anywhere. And people that, when you have weak points or points of dysfunction where you're not as strong, like that's all energy like starts to leak out. So if you don't have a strong enough of a core, and like, again, if your shoulder hurts, you start to lean out of it, and you have energy going to the left and away from your throw, and your head starts to get out of the throw because you don't want to stay in it. And you start to do those things and develop these bad habits, right? And they don't help, not only with your velocity, but certainly accuracy as well. And so, mind you, we go into training camp the following year. Again, here I'm year 4. I kind of had a setback the year prior. I'm very anxious to get back to my career. And in training camp, I'll never forget it, as I was dealing with this pain, kind of discomfort in my shoulder, I went to go throw a go ball, kind of a long ball downfield, and definitely felt and heard a snap in my shoulder. And obviously, pretty bummed at that point to be 10 months into your rehab and have a setback like that. So
yeah, start to finish, obviously it wasn't the smoothest of sailing, and certainly there's been developments in surgical techniques and,
yes,
and even the rehab process since your time. But there's
Are you saying I'm old, Stephania? Are you saying I'm old?
I would never. I would never. No, you're young. You're young at heart.
I'm just kidding.
Look, I was a fan, I remember back then, but I think what's important for people to understand is that, and you mentioned it, nobody's cutting you any slack. while you have this injury. There are certain unique pressures. You were young in your career. Anthony Richardson is young in his career. You were the number 1 overall draft pick. He's the number 4 overall draft pick. You went on to have the best years of your career after you had this shoulder injury. So I think that all puts it into perspective. Anthony Richardson has already appeared in social media posts since his surgery with a sling over his shoulder and a smile on his face. But now begins the lengthy rehab process. Typically, following an AC joint reconstruction, the athlete begins with lower level range of motion and strengthening, gradually progressing to overhead rotation around 3 months. And then the next 4 to 6 weeks, he builds on that overhead movement with progressive strengthening and neuromuscular training. And if all goes well, the athlete can initiate a throwing program around 4.5 to 5 months. Given that Richardson had his surgery in October, he should be looking at being able to make all his throws when June minicamps roll around. That would give him a nice lead-in time to be ready to return when the season begins in 2024. All in all, early repairs offer the best outcomes when it comes to return to play. So the Colts, Anthony Richardson fans, and Anthony Richardson fantasy managers have every reason to be optimistic going forward. Well, that's a wrap here on the first episode of Answering the Bell. We'll be back next time taking you through some of the biggest injury conversations from across the league. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter/X and make sure to leave me a comment telling us what you want to learn about in future episodes. Thanks for joining.